In December 1999, Great Falls police investigated a case that had everyone wondering how much darkness might conceal in plain sight. What started as a standard search warrant for a guy with a troubled background quickly became an unexpected find. Inside his house, they discovered evidence that showed something considerably more frightening was going on right beneath their eyes. Was it just the deeds of a severely disturbed guy, or had his worrisome ideas evolved into something much more dangerous? To comprehend the whole scale of what was going on, we must take a step back and examine the life of Nathaniel Barjona, a man whose background would ultimately send shockwaves through an entire town. Welcome to Unseen True Crime Stories HQ. I thank you, my viewers, most especially my subscribers, for your support as we keep improving and bringing daily told and untold true crime stories. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. So, let's get started. Nathaniel Barjona, born David Paul Brown on February 15, 1957, in Worcester, Massachusetts, seemed to be a normal youngster at first appearance. He was born to Philip and Tyra Brown, who tried their utmost to raise him in a strict environment. Nathaniel, on the other hand, displayed unusual conduct from an early age. His early years were characterized by bizarre and frightening behaviors that many dismissed as idiosyncrasies or phases. Nobody could have predicted that these tendencies would only worsen with time. Nathaniel showed symptoms of trouble as early as 3 weeks old. He was diagnosed with hydrocephalus, a disease in which excess fluid collects in the brain, placing pressure on it and possibly causing developmental problems. Although he finally recovered from the ailment, the consequences were likely long-term. Nathaniel's cognitive and emotional development seemed to be irregular, and his parents' unwillingness to address these concerns contributed to his downward spiral. Nathaniel's unusual conduct was often disregarded by his mother when he was a kid. She disregarded odd habits, such as picking at his skin until it bled, then chewing on the wounds until they healed. While some children may have outgrown such behaviors, Nathaniel continued to behave in ways that bothered people around him. His peers were appalled by his acts, and his instructors routinely phoned his mother to report the disturbing conduct. Tyra, on the other hand, was mostly apathetic, never taking the required efforts to comprehend or treat the underlying causes of her son's problems. This negligence enabled Nathaniel's troubling behavior to go unchecked, laying the groundwork for what was to follow. But the physical habits were not the only cause for concern. Nathaniel's actions got more aggressive. Nathaniel, then 7, tricked a 5-year-old girl into his family's basement by pretending to show her a toy or play a game. Instead, he tried to strangle her. Fortunately, Nathaniel's mother heard the girl's cries and intervened just in time. The incident was brushed off and no formal action was taken. The event was dismissed as a juvenile tantrum, and no one seemed to recognize the risk Nathaniel represented even at that early age. However, the absence of assistance exacerbated Nathaniel's darker inclinations. Nathaniel's father, Philip, a rigorous disciplinarian, chastised him harshly for his actions, but it was evident that his techniques were not effective. Instead of teaching Nathaniel about the repercussions of his conduct, physical punishment may have intensified his aggressive impulses. The more Philip tried to control Nathaniel, the more the small kid seemed to resist. Nathaniel's behavior were more out of control and dangerous, rather than just rebellious. Nathaniel's behavior became much more disturbing when he was 12 years old. He started targeting younger youngsters. One day, he enticed a 6-year-old child into an isolated spot by promising him a pleasant pastime. What should have been a fun play date turned into something far more frightening. Nathaniel mistreated the youngster, an offense that was unnoticed at the time. Again, his parents discounted his acts as part of his unique behavior, never realizing the significance of what he had done. This pattern of neglect, along with his escalating psychiatric problems, laid the groundwork for Nathaniel's destiny. Nathaniel's actions became more out of control over time. By adolescence, his unsettling habits had become well established. At 17, he tried to kidnap 2 lads from his area, enticing them into a cemetery with promises of fun. What he had planned for the youngsters, however, was anything from harmless. He meant to injure them, But thankfully, one of the lads saw something was wrong and managed to flee. This was yet another failed chance for intervention, as the boy's parents chose not to pursue charges, and Nathaniel was once again permitted to slip through the court system. Despite these increasingly frightening indicators, the authorities and Nathaniel's family continued to overlook the gravity of his actions. He was able to continue forward in life, victimizing others while the red lights remained ignored. His youth, marked by troublesome habits and a lack of help, laid the groundwork for the worst crimes that followed. The warning flags were all there, but no one took them seriously, not even Nathaniel, who was well aware of his own abilities. As he got older, his illicit activities started to intensify, and his unsettling behavior quickly evolved into something much more deadly. His boyhood, characterized by weird and aggressive inclinations, foretold the atrocities he would later do. Despite the warnings, no one could have anticipated how far Nathaniel Barjona would go. As Nathaniel grew older, his behaviors got more blatant and brutal. At the age of 17, his conduct became much more out of control. Nathaniel once impersonated a police officer, complete with a uniform and badge. He kidnapped an 8-year-old child called Richard Connor. Nathaniel held Richard for hours and subjected him to serious harm. Nathaniel was apprehended only because a neighbor observed the occurrence and reported it to police. Despite the gravity of the act, Nathaniel was sentenced to probation, an extremely light punishment for such a terrible felony. Once again, he avoided adequate punishment. Nathaniel's probation did not change him. Rather, it appeared to empower him. His predatory behavior persisted as he crossed state boundaries, pursuing other victims in Connecticut and Massachusetts. In 1977, he abducted 2 youngsters from Shrewsbury, Massachusetts. Again, he pretended to be a law enforcement official to earn their confidence. He brought them to a remote location where he detained them and caused bodily injury. Nathaniel tried to crush one kid's ribs by leaping on his chest, while the other boy claimed to be asleep in order to live. Nathaniel drove away with the second youngster in his trunk after abandoning the first on the side of the road. This was a very heinous act, yet Nathaniel escaped serious punishment once again. Despite the gravity of his deeds, he was sentenced to just 18 to 20 years in jail, a maximum punishment that seemed insufficient given the scope of his offenses. Nathaniel's time in jail was not idle. He continued to have troubling interactions with mental health doctors, freely sharing his terrible dreams. His dreams were so severe that he was sent to Bridgewater State Hospital, a mental health institution for those deemed sexually dangerous. Nathaniel was far from healed at this point, and his mental condition seemed to be deteriorating even worse. Despite the warnings and his obvious mental fragility, Nathaniel was freed after a parole hearing in 1984. Experts warned that he was likely to reoffend, but the justice system did little to address these concerns. Nathaniel was pronounced rehabilitated after spending less than a decade in jail, and the court authorized his release, a decision that would have serious ramifications. Nathaniel's release, combined with a lack of sufficient monitoring, placed him on a road that would lead to further victims. He had previously shown a clear history of aggressive and predatory conduct, and now he was free to act on his frightening inclinations. After spending time for previous charges, Nathaniel Barjona, previously known as David Brown, was released from Bridgewater State Hospital in 1991. He had been in the mental hospital for many years, but despite his continued troublesome conduct, the system considered him sufficiently recovered to be released. While in the hospital, Nathaniel decided to alter his name from David Paul Brown to Nathaniel Benjamin Levi Barjona. The motives behind this name change are unclear, although it seems to be part of a bigger effort to remake oneself. Nathaniel subsequently said that he changed his name to suffer discrimination and to better appreciate the persecution of Jews. Despite this allegation, there was no indication that Nathaniel had any Jewish lineage. It was most likely a personal reinvention or an attempt to remove himself from his background. His adoption of a new name would come to represent the duplicity that would characterize his future actions, hiding behind a fake persona while continuing to prey on innocent youngsters. Nathaniel's release came with a series of cautions from mental health doctors, who voiced worries about his risk of reoffending. Despite these warnings, the parole board determined that he had made sufficient progress to be freed on the condition that he attend outpatient therapy. However, as had been the case throughout his problematic background, Nathaniel rejected the assistance given and relocated to Great Falls, Montana, to live with his mother. When Nathaniel arrived in Montana, he fit in with the locals and maintained a low profile. However, this wouldn't last long. His past practice of imitating law enforcement persisted nearly immediately. In 1991, he was apprehended outside a post office while trying to kidnap a small child. Nathaniel was once again claiming to be a police officer, a strategy he had previously employed to earn the confidence of youngsters and their parents. Fortunately, the boy's mother saw the incident and raced to intercede, saving additional injury. However, Nathaniel was not charged with a severe offense. Instead, he was sentenced to probation, which appeared insufficient considering the seriousness of his acts. Nathaniel's probationary term looked to be characterized by quiet. For the following several years, he kept out of the public spotlight, blending in with the population and avoiding the attention of local authorities. During this period, however, disturbing signals emerged. Neighbors observed weird activity, but nothing serious enough to need quick attention. The disconcerting fact was that Nathaniel was far from rehabilitated, and it was becoming evident that his evil inclinations were still there. Nathaniel's conduct continued to be disturbing throughout the 1990s, as he kept his head down and avoided the sight of authorities. He may have seemed innocuous to those around him, but the tranquility of his existence was the prelude to the storm. Behind closed doors, his predatory instincts resurfaced, and his next prey was a small youngster called Zachary Ramsey. In 1996, Zachary Ramsey was 10 years old and lived in Great Falls, Montana. He was recognized for his upbeat outlook and engaging manner. Teachers and classmates admired him, and his family characterized him as a kind boy who enjoyed interacting with people. Zach left for school on February 6, 1996, like he did every morning, eager to meet his classmates and go about his daily routine. However, that morning would be the last time anybody saw him. Zach was last seen strolling along Great Falls' icy streets, heading to Whittier Elementary School, which is just a short distance from his house. The day began like any other, with Zach dressed in his blue denim jacket, a blue football shirt with his name on it, and black high-top shoes. As he traveled, he passed via a familiar alleyway, shortening his journey to school. However, somewhere down that alleyway, Zach disappeared without a trace. The disappearance of a little kid in broad daylight stunned the tiny hamlet of Great Falls. An immediate search was undertaken. Friends, relatives, and local officials started scanning the streets, hoping for a swift conclusion. But, despite their best attempts, no trace of Zach was discovered. The situation rapidly became a source of worry, and an inquiry into his disappearance was launched. Witnesses quickly came forward with alarming allegations. Several others reported seeing a guy near the area where Zach had gone. This individual was spotted strolling behind Zach while wearing a navy blue jacket that looked like a police officer's uniform. One important witness reported seeing an off-white, four-door automobile parked in the neighborhood, its motor silently idling. The odd automobile stuck out, and the witness remembered seeing a kid wandering alongside it. As the research progressed, another key lead surfaced. A blazer and blue jeans were discovered dumped in a neighboring garbage. The outfit was similar to what Zach had worn that morning. This revelation resulted in more questions than answers. Had Zach been transported someplace and his things dumped, or was this just a coincidence? The appearance of the garments so near to the site indicated that something evil had occurred. Witness comments and tangible evidence continued to strengthen the case. As police put together the evidence, they discovered that the same individual had been seen many times in the vicinity that morning. He was seen wandering near the area where Zach was last seen, and several witnesses recognized him. The individual in issue was none other than Nathaniel Barjona. His name came up multiple times throughout the inquiry, and witnesses who had seen him in the vicinity started to draw parallels to his previous conduct. One of the most significant developments occurred when a witness definitely recognized Nathaniel as the guy who had been pursuing Zach down the alleyway. This was a huge breakthrough since it tied Zach's disappearance to Nathaniel's terrible past. Nathaniel was no stranger to law enforcement, and his criminal record had already aroused concerns. He had previously been arrested for crimes involving minors, and it seemed that the trend was continuing. As detectives focused their attention on Nathaniel Barjona, they started to delve further into his past. His prior misdeeds, including impersonating law officers and engaging in troubling conduct with minors, made him a top suspect in the case. However, there was no clear evidence tying him directly to Zach's disappearance. This would soon alter. In the weeks after Zach's disappearance, investigators continued to look into Nathaniel's actions, hoping to find further evidence. They had no idea that obtaining a search warrant for Nathaniel's residence would be the turning point. They discovered something that would shock and horrify the whole neighborhood. The inquiry into Zachary Ramsey's disappearance has taken a disturbing turn. As Nathaniel Barjona's name became more essential to the investigation, police dug further into his past. His background had previously sparked suspicions, but with further proof, it was time to find out the truth. Nathaniel was arrested in December 1999 for impersonating a police officer after being observed outside a nearby elementary school. It was an arrest that resulted in the unexpected revelation of what was hiding within his house. When the search warrant was obtained and officers entered Nathaniel's residence, they expected to uncover proof of his illicit activity. However, what they found was much more frightening than they could have anticipated. One of the first items noticed in Nathaniel's house was a bizarre pull string sprouting from the kitchen ceiling. At first sight, it seemed to be an unusual and inconsequential characteristic, yet something about it sparked instant anxiety. Investigators couldn't help but wonder what the thread may be used for and why it was concealed in the ceiling. It was just the first of many strange and unpleasant revelations to come. The case took a frightening turn when officers discovered a cookbook in Nathaniel's house. The book's contents were highly unpleasant, with odd and creepy recipe titles that left little room for imagination. These titles, although vague, spoke to Nathaniel's disturbing ideas. They were far from harmless, and the detectives couldn't help but wonder whether these letters revealed something deeper than anybody had expected. Among the discovery were almost 3,500 images of youngsters, as well as undeveloped film. The images looked to have been shot in a variety of locales, with some even including youngsters who had crossed paths with Nathaniel. The most concerning revelation was a list of names for youngsters who seemed to be of special interest to Nathaniel. Zachary Ramsey's name appeared on that list, followed by the word deceased. The implications were unsettling, leaving detectives with the unnerving question, was Zach another of Nathaniel's victims? As the inquiry progressed, officers discovered human hair in a meat grinder hidden in a corner of the kitchen. While the hair did not match Zachary's DNA, it raised serious issues regarding its origins. Whose hair had been in Nathaniel's grinder, and why? Along with the hair, bone bits were uncovered. Although the bones could not be recognized, the discovery of these bits verified the darkest fears. There was something considerably more evil at work. The neighbors, however, made the worst discovery. They remembered Nathaniel organizing cookouts and serving a variety of meat meals. Several neighbors commented that the meat tasted unusually gamey and odd in ways they couldn't describe. Nathaniel said it was venison that he had personally hunted. However, there was one major problem. Nathaniel did not have a hunting license, and there was no proof that he had ever hunted. The unusual taste of the flesh, along with the findings within his house, raised the horrifying prospect that Nathaniel had been employing something even more sinister. Nathaniel's old housemates provided more testimony. They told scary tales about Nathaniel constantly invoking Zachary Ramsey. Nathaniel, according to one roommate, said Zach would never be recovered, suggesting that the youngster had been disassembled and dispersed among several locations. These disturbing statements, delivered with unsettling conviction, sent a shock of fear through the investigators. As further evidence emerged, it became evident that Nathaniel Barjona had been hidden in plain sight for years. His frightening writings, images, remains, and cryptic remarks all pointed to a predator who had mostly gone undetected. Despite his previous offenses and many warning flags, the system had failed to adequately handle Nathaniel's harmful conduct. He had slipped through the gaps, living freely while preying on defenseless youngsters. The finding of the evidence merely added to the mystery surrounding Zachary Ramsey's disappearance. Was Nathaniel responsible for his death? How many further victims had been overlooked? And how did Nathaniel manage to go undiscovered for so long? However, as the inquiry into Nathaniel Barjona developed, it became evident that finding justice would be a tough task. Even when strong evidence accumulated against him, legal impediments arose that made it impossible to hold him responsible for his acts. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of this case was Zachary Ramsey's mother's position. Despite mounting evidence, she refused to acknowledge that her son had died. A psychic had persuaded her that Zach was still alive and living in another nation. Despite overwhelming proof, she couldn't let go of her notion. Her inability to believe resulted in a painful turning point. The accusations against Nathaniel in connection with Zach's disappearance were eventually withdrawn owing to a lack of specific evidence, and the inquiry into his case was discontinued. The justice system, however, was not kind to Nathaniel for his past activities. Despite a lengthy history of unsettling conduct, Nathaniel's actions often slipped through the gaps of the system. His earlier actions, such as kidnapping and causing damage to minors, resulted in lower terms or no penalty at all. These institutional flaws enabled him to continue his predatory actions unabated for many years. Nathaniel was ultimately convicted in 1991 and sentenced to 130 years in jail. However, his trial was not without challenges. The path to his conviction was lengthy and fraught with delays, leaving many wondering why it took so long for him to be appropriately held responsible. Despite this, Nathaniel remained imprisoned for the remainder of his life. Though the judicial processes were far from uncomplicated, Nathaniel remained a source of anxiety while behind jail. However, it was obvious that the entire scope of his acts would never be completely comprehended. His time in jail did not provide him any closure, as the unanswered doubts about his acts continued to torment those impacted by them. Nathaniel died in 2008, completing a chapter in his life, but leaving more questions than answers. The unsolved aspects of his case have left the families and communities affected by his acts in a terrible limbo, still seeking the complete truth. Nathaniel's case is a sharp reminder of the challenges that the judicial system might encounter when dealing with such complicated and horrific crimes, as well as how the consequences of unsolved cases can linger for years. As we end the chapter on Nathaniel Barjona's distressing tale, the larger issue remains. Are we doing enough to safeguard our society's most vulnerable members? Can our institutions, including law enforcement, the courts, and our communities, do more to detect predators before they do harm? These are queries that need replies. What are your thoughts? Do you believe our present mechanisms are enough to prevent predators like Nathaniel from hurting others? Are we missing chances to act sooner? Share your ideas and opinions in the comment section below. We want to hear from you. If you found this article thought-provoking, remember to like, share, and subscribe. Your donation enables us to continue to share these important stories. Let's continue the discourse and promote awareness. Thank you for watching, and please keep watchful.